Greetings to one and all. I'm Dr. William Lester, coming to you from the studios of Blackwater Media in the great city of Atlanta. I'd like to take this opportunity to wish everyone a Happy New Year. Welcome to 2024. What awaits you here is a chilling and horrifying journey into the world of lycanthropy. Blackwater Media presents Werewolf Weekend.
The story begins with a priest from a thriving village in Ireland who was traveling to a nearby town on business for his church. The priest's journey across the countryside was long and arduous, and as night grew near, he was forced to set up camp near a dark forest that was reputed to be haunted. During the night, the priest heard a clawing and scratching outside his tent. When he went outside to investigate, he was attacked by a wolf. He was bitten severely, and just as he thought the wolf was about to finish him off, the cross around his neck was exposed. The wolf suddenly ceased its attack and merely stood over him, staring into his eyes. Then, inexplicably, it ran off and left him lying on the ground, bleeding badly from his wounds. The next day he managed to crawl back to his village, where he was discovered by the local doctor. With good medical care, his wounds soon healed, and he was back to work in no time. The priest was re-energized and tackled his preaching duties with renewed vigor. He inspired the villagers and helped them to build a new church. The faith of his parishioners was strengthened, and every day his church was packed with worshipers. But there were still some problems in the village. Every full moon, someone in the village was found dead or went missing under mysterious circumstances. People said that they had seen a creature stalking through the village at night. A creature that walked like a man, but whose body was covered in fur and bore the head of a wolf. There was talk of a curse on the village, and many believed that a werewolf was stalking them and picking them off one by one. The priest began to wonder why God had cursed his village with these horrible murders. It seemed as if there was no end to the death and destruction. One night during a full moon, the villagers decided that they had to catch and kill the werewolf that was plaguing their village once and for all. They set a trap by tying the most beautiful girl in the village to a tree, using her as bait to lure the werewolf. High above in the branches of the tree, they rigged up a trap to catch the wolf. Then they hid in the bushes and lay in wait for their prey. Soon they heard a crashing sound coming through the forest, and suddenly the werewolf appeared in the clearing. As it made its way towards the terrified young girl, the villagers cut the ropes that were tied to the tree, and a huge cage crashed down on top of the wolf, trapping him behind its heavy iron bars. The jubilant villagers rushed out from their hiding places and drove long spears into the body of the werewolf, piercing its heart. As the monster collapsed on the floor of the cage, the people watched his hairy body ripple and change. Gradually, the creature changed from wolf to man as the life ebbed from his body. The villagers fell to their knees and began to weep as they realized that they had killed their beloved priest. I live alone, and have for 3 years since my divorce. And it's mostly been great to have my own space and my own house where I'm free to do whatever I want, whenever I want. That said, I spend most of my time in the evenings in my upstairs study reading, painting, writing, and listening to music. In the eyes of most people, I don't really have a social life, and that's okay with me. For the most part, I've never felt uneasy in my own house. until about a month ago when I went to the kitchen at night to make a drink. Now let me explain something to you. My kitchen overlooks an overgrown garden, which in turn overlooks some woods. It's a fairly rural area, and it's very quiet at night, which makes it a friendlier environment for some wildlife to come out. I often see foxes and deer, and I've been woken up at night by the scream of a fox at about 4 a.m. once. And they like to hang around outside the front of my house because there's easy access from there to my back garden and then to the woods. My kitchen has this big window which looks right into the garden. And at night when the lights are on, I can barely see more than a few feet ahead of the window as it acts sort of like a mirror. Well, on this particular night, the few feet ahead of me that I could see was all this thing needed to make itself visible to me. I hadn't noticed it until I looked up and out of the window after making my drink. It was a bipedal creature, skinny, but very tall with hind legs and covered with hair, except around the face. Now, it sounds ridiculous to some people, but the first thing that popped into my head when I saw it was werewolf. Its mouth or snout was protruded slightly, somewhat similar to a canine's, and it had ears that were pointed back at an angle from what I could see. And it just stayed there looking at me with two huge yellow eyes. His head was tilted to the side and its bottom jaw was slightly open. I didn't even know how long it'd been there. I'd been in the kitchen for about a minute before I even bothered to look out of the window. I just froze. You think you can rationalize what you do in situations like that? But I was fucking frozen in terror. I was telling myself to move, but my body felt icy cold. I couldn't do anything. Eventually, like after 10 seconds, although it felt much longer, I managed to move and ran out of the room, not daring to take my eyes off the creature. And as I did so, its head rotated to follow me as I left to the comfort of the upstairs, which was the creepiest thing about it. Since then, I've not gone into my kitchen at night, save for a few necessary occasions. I'm preparing everything I need before it gets dark, and then staying upstairs for the rest of the night. If I absolutely need to go into the kitchen, I rush in so I can get out ASAP. That feeling you get when you turn all the lights off before you have to go back upstairs and feel like you're going to be chased upstairs by some unknown entity, that's the feeling I get when I go into my kitchen at night. It is my great pleasure to welcome you all once again into this rather dark and gloomy hall of the horrific. I'm your host. You might call me a master of the monstrous, or perhaps even a connoisseur of the creepy. Our tale deals with an old saying, confession is good for the soul. And if that is indeed true, it must apply even in the most bizarre of circumstances. Our story is called A Werewolf's Confession. And full moon notwithstanding, such a revelation can only be heard on the Nightfall radio show. So, here we are again. The holidays are upon us. All over town, the store windows are decorated in their usual Yuletide regalia. Houses are decorated. Street lamps are adorned with the festive decor of the season. We've even had a dusting of snow, with maybe another 2 or 3 inches yet to come. I think that by the time you hear this, the new year should be upon you. And yet, I sit here at my kitchen table, drinking whiskey in an attempt to silence a nightmare, trying to suppress a demon that rages inside of me. It's not stupid fucking holiday depression. It's not some unadmitted childhood angst.
The fact is, I'm a murderer. No, I'm not some psycho killer with mutilated bodies in my basement. No, I'm not a coked out addict who isn't above killing just to get high. It's none of those things. But since I'm sure you're curious, I'll just tell you up front, and I don't give a fuck whether you believe it or not. You see, I'm cursed. I'm forsaken by man and God, whatever God is. But I'm sure that God is real. Because if a dark monstrosity like me exists, then certainly something of light and goodness must also exist. You see, I'm a werewolf. Yes, you heard me. Don't waste time trying to play it back to see if you heard it right. It happened 2 years ago. A hunting trip to Canada with a college friend. We lingered too long and let dark catch us. It came out of a thicket and knocked us senseless. It bit me on the arm. My friend fired at it, and it ran off into the darkness. A month later, under a full moon, I changed. I don't know how many people I've killed, but my blood-soaked clothes are proof enough of my effectiveness as a killer. The deaths are usually passed off as attacks by packs of wild dogs. The police know better, but they can't ever admit the truth. And I can't go on like this. The fear, the remorse, and the pain brought on when I change. It's fucking indescribable. The moon will be full tomorrow night, but it all ends tonight. You see, I have the cure. The only known cure. A silver bullet. All it'll take is this one .45 caliber slug and the nightmare ends. My life, such as it is a small price to pay for the pain, suffering, and death that I've caused. So that's it. Whoever hears this, take it as a lesson. Or better yet, a warning. A warning about the reality of monsters and pure evil. Goodbye. And please, please, pray for my soul.
You don't see many wild stallions anymore. No, you don't see many wild stallions anymore. And even if he did run off 3 of your best mares, he's one of the last of a wild and very singular breed. Come to where the flavor is. Come to Marlboro country.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. I offer you a warm and hearty welcome to this most unusual abode, which is neither warm nor populated by living things with beating hearts. I'd like to offer up a little something for your consideration. A full moon, an isolated farmhouse, and the terror experienced by one man when he discovers that some of the old legends are in fact true. Incidentally, this is the Nightfall radio show, and our story is called By the Light of an Ozark Moon. On summer nights, when the heat lay like a woolen blanket over the Ozark forests and wrapped the hills with humidity, Grandmammy would sit on the front porch where she smoked,
staring out over the fertile valley and sloping fields that led to the river. If it was the dark of the moon, she would tell funny stories and laugh with us. A crescent or half-moon filled her with nostalgia. Her tales on those nights came from her childhood, but it was different if the moon waxed full. A full moon above the woodland is a majestic sight. The moonlight silvered the tall trees and made the rocks shimmer with that almost ghostly light, but I never found it beautiful because a full moon upset my grandmother. She was a brave woman. I've seen her kill copperheads with nothing more than a large rock or the sharp edge of her hoe. I once watched a tornado dance a destructive path across the valley, uprooting trees in its wake, and she did not flinch nor even seek the safety of the root cellar. She feared little, but the full-bellied moon struck terror into her heart. I did not understand why, not for years, but I knew, as did we all, that on nights when the moon was full she would turn maudlin and might weep. On those nights, despite her fears, my grandfather would always leave. I thought he went coon hunting, a common enough pastime in the Ozark woods, until I was about 10. I noticed that he did not take the hounds, Lucky and Shep, along, nor did he take his gun, and his buddies did not come to meet him on the ridge. I asked just once where he went on those bright nights, but Grandmammy made me no answer, and I lacked the courage to ever ask again. Her eyes held such agony, her mouth twisted with distress, and I could not question her about Grandpa's whereabouts again. I was there on the farm, more often in summer than in winter, but I recall that on those December nights when the moon swelled full that Grandmammy huddled in a corner of the large living room, the television turned low. Although she stared straight ahead, she was not watching the fuzzy, snowy picture on the screen, nor was she gazing at the Christmas tree, a cedar cut down in the hills and carried in to be decorated with popcorn, paper garlands, and a tin-foil star. She always put me to bed earlier than usual on nights of the full moon, no matter how much I protested. In the summer I lay awake long into the heated dusk and wondered where Grandpa went, but in winter I curled beneath the quilts and slept, no matter how early she sent me upstairs. I may seem dense, but I never made the connection to the full moon and his absences. During the other moon cycles, he was a good grandfather. I toddled after him as he did his farm chores as soon as I could walk. He took me swimming on steamy summer afternoons down at the river, in the wide bend everyone called the swimming hole. I learned to float and later to swim there, in those cold, clear waters. On occasion, a snake might swim past, but I wasn't afraid. He loved homemade ice cream, Lucky Strike cigarettes, and wore faded denim overalls. He was a farmer who tended to his cows, a father who raised his 6 children with a firm hand and loving heart, a husband who provided for his bride for almost 70 years. And he was a werewolf. Saying the word, even now, is very difficult for me. It is hard for me to match the man I loved so dearly, a man I modeled my life after, with the wild, snarling beast he became when the moon grew full. I might never have believed it but for the thing that happened, what I saw myself, and what I experienced. I was no longer a child. I was a man, married with a 2-year-old son and another on the way. Although I was not a farmer by trade, I had become an officer of the law, a highway patrolman with the state police. I was building my life on the foundations Grandpa built for me. Although past 90, he was still alive, and so was Grandmammy. They still lived on the farm, although the cattle were sold, and the fields would have grown up into brush if my uncle had not run his small herd into their pastures. As often as I could, I gathered my wife, Trinity, my son, Chase, and we went to the farm. Sometimes it was just a weekend visit, a brief trip back home, but on more than one vacation, we headed for the farm. Trinity griped because the farm was and is isolated. The old farmhouse lacked air conditioning, but the breezes that blew up the narrow river valley had cooled it for generations. Chase followed Grandpa as I had, and I did what I could around the farm to keep things up, fixing a fence, painting trim, and such. That autumn, my wife was 5 months pregnant with our second child, and she didn't want to leave the city for the farm. I had promised my grandparents that I would come, promised Chase that he would pick up walnuts in the October days, so my son and I came alone to the farm. Always before, I had made good time on the long drive out of Kansas City, but that Friday night I was running late. Because of a major traffic accident on one of the highways that feed into the city, I was late leaving my shift. By the time I arrived home, Trinity had supper ready, and already more than a little mad about my planned weekend trip, insisted that we eat before we left. We ate, and then we jumped into my pickup truck, another thing in which I aped Grandpa, and headed south. Dark fell long before we reached the Ozark Hills, but I didn't mind. A full harvest moon, orange as the pumpkins we would carve at Halloween, rose and illuminated the highway. It lit the countryside that we traveled through, and as I came down the long drive that led through the fields to the farmhouse, it bathed everything with a rich light. I will admit that I had all but forgotten Grandmammy's strange preoccupation with the full moon. Somehow our visits had been through no design in other parts of the lunar cycle, and so I thought nothing of the full moon. I admired, in fact, how lovely the farm looked in that light, how the farmhouse rose from the earth like something out of a Currier and Ives print. Chase was asleep, snug in his car seat as I rolled my Silverado to a stop around the back of the house. Several of the downstairs windows were alight with a cheerful glow, and I didn't realize that anything was wrong until Grandmammy rushed out of the back door. "Henry's not back!" The words burst out of her throat. She did not bother with a greeting. Past 90, she moved with slow steps most of the time, but that night she moved with the speed and grace of a much younger woman. "He went up into the woods 'fore dark, and he isn't back. You best get inside now." Worry crawled up the back of my neck. At 95, there were many things that could have happened to Grandpa, and none was very pleasant. As I mentally berated myself for not doing more to limit his activities around the farm, or urging them to move into the nearby town, I fumbled for the words. "Let me carry Chase in, and I'll go find him." I was not eager to go into the woods and search, but I saw no other alternative. Although I would be able to see with the moonlight in my service flashlight, I was worried about any lingering copperheads coiled on rocks to catch the fading warmth of the day. I was also, to be honest, afraid of what I might find. In my career, I've seen many dead bodies, most mangled in vehicle accidents, a few killed in cold-blooded murder. I'd faced death long ago, and while I didn't enjoy looking it in the eye, I really did not want to find my grandfather's body in the woods. I was about to suggest that we call for help from the local sheriff when Grandmammy spoke. "No!" That single word fell hard between us. "No, Greg, you won't. You'll come in this house and we'll lock the door. You can't go after him, not now, not after dark has fallen." Although I had believed her to be of sound mind despite her advanced age, I wondered if I had been wrong. As I unstrapped my son from the car seat and carried him into the house, I questioned her. "Don't you want me to go find him? He may be sick or hurt or—" "No." She shook her head back and forth with force. "He may well be, but you can't go after him, not until morning." "But he might be—" I didn't want to say the word. She had no such compunction. "Dead? Yes, son, he might well be dead by then, but if you go now, you may be as well. He's not dead just yet." I wondered how she could know, or think she knew, but then I stopped halfway through the back door as a strange sound rippled the still night air. The howl sounded angry. It sounded almost human, and yet something like a wolf. Perplexed, I looked at my grandmother. She, frail and feeble, took my son from my arms and said, lips tight, "I'll put the boy to bed and then I'll tell you what I should have told you before." I waited, uneasy, listening as her footsteps clumped up the stairs. I knew each creak of the floor, and it seemed like a very long time until she returned, winded. Her face had the harsh lines of a carved mask, something Native American or even African. As she settled down into her old armchair, she reached for a cigarette. "Grandmammy, you quit smoking years ago." I was shocked. She'd given up smoking after her 70th birthday. Her aged lips clamped tight on the unfiltered Lucky, and she lit it with a match. "For what I have to tell you, Greg, I need a cigarette. You won't believe me, but please don't think I'm a crazy old woman. What I'm going to tell you is true." Her smoke made me cough as I asked, "What is it?" In her matter-of-fact, everyday tone, she said, "Henry's a werewolf. Been one since he was a boy of 12. It's a secret I've carried for many years, and a secret I hoped never to tell anyone." I could not believe her. A werewolf? Please, I thought as I tried to banish the image of a late-night movie where an old gypsy woman warned a werewolf. "Oh, Grandmammy." I thought I understood now. She had lost her mind, and I tried to find a plan that would both help her and find my grandfather. She shot me a look that curdled my heart, a hard, knowing look I'd never seen on her face before. "I knew you wouldn't believe me, but it's so. I knew when I married him. He told me the night before we wed, but I loved Henry, and so I married him anyway. I moved here to this farm, and 'twas his own mother taught me what to do when the spells come on him. His daddy had made a place in a cave up on the hill, a place where Henry could go and shut himself into when the moon was full. When he was a little boy, they locked him in, but by the time I knew him, Henry put himself into the cave. At first, his daddy was the one to go let him out in the morning, but soon it was me. I've done it for all these years, rain or shine, wet or cold. I could not imagine that there was a cave on the farm. I knew, or thought I did, every foot of the woods and the farm. I played along, though, to buy time so that I could help my grandparents. Then he isn't locked up tonight?" Her sigh echoed in the room, and she blew smoke out of both nostrils with a snort. "No, he's getting slower these days, and he wasn't out of the yard yet when the moon rose. I ain't watched him turn in years, but I saw him tonight, changing from a man into a werewolf. If you don't believe me, his clothes lay on the ground out by the little barn. You heard him howl, same as me, didn't you?" I was cold, colder than I'd ever been, and my hands trembled. She made it sound so possible, so plausible, but I couldn't admit the truth. "I heard a coyote." It didn't sound like a coyote, though, but it must be. There were no such beings as werewolves, and if there were, Grandpa could not be one. "Nope, you heard Henry. He's out there running wild in the woods, howling and doing God knows what. He may kill some stock, I hope no more than that, because he's a beast. A raging beast. No man can stop him tonight, not unless they have a silver bullet." I looked around the comfortable living room I knew so well, and it had not changed. The same vintage furniture, that hurricane lamp she had always had, and the prints on the wall had faded, but were the same I remembered from my childhood. Yet everything I knew and believed had changed, and I realized nothing would ever be the same again. In that moment, I felt out of kilter, so out of sync with life that I wanted to scream, to howl myself like an animal, and in that moment I began to believe that perhaps my grandfather could be a werewolf after all. If someone stops him, won't they kill him? I had to know. Yes, but he may have to be stopped. I've always known that. 2 tears, one on each side of her face, rolled down toward her chin, and I wanted to cry myself. "Grandmammy, I'm beginning to believe this crazy thing," I told her. "But I have to know how he became a werewolf." She lit a second lucky strike from the end of the one she had smoked down to the butt. "I asked myself years back. When Henry was a little boy, he liked to prowl the woods, sometimes at night. He come home one night saying a wolf bit him. That was around 1920. His folks cleaned the wound, washed it out with whiskey, and thought he would be fine. Biggest worry they had was rabies, but when the moon come full again, he turned into a werewolf." I listened, feeling like I must be having a nightmare, that I would wake up back in the townhouse with Trinity beside me. But the smell of the tobacco smoke,
The feel of the rump-sprung couch under me screamed reality. It was true then, a terrible truth, and I wondered just why Grandmammy had told me. Then I realized that she had been worried about chasing me, afraid in case Grandpa roared out of the dark to bite us or even kill us. Her fear was born out of love. "You were worried he might attack us," I said, hating each word as I forced it up my dry throat. "We're safe now inside the house with you. And Grandpa, he'll be all right in the morning, won't he?" I should have known that there would be more. Something else even more terrible than the bare knowledge that my beloved grandfather was a werewolf. But I did not, and I wasn't prepared. "No, he won't," Grandmammy said. Another undulating howl outside, close enough to make the window glass tremble and raise the hair on the back of my neck. He would have been if he'd got to the cave in time, but since he ain't, he'll smell our blood. He'll come for us, Greg, unless you stop him. My mind froze, blanked out, and I stared at her, unable to comprehend what she asked me to do. When I understood, I began to shake, to tremble, and to feel a rising nausea twist my stomach into knots. My grandmother, a strong woman, who had succored me and given much to my raising, was asking me to kill my grandfather. If I hadn't already been certain, the sight of the single silver bullet she pulled from her pocket would have convinced me. I rebelled against the idea that I could kill the grandfather that I had loved, shoot him through the heart with this absurd silver bullet, and told her, "I can't kill Grandpa. I can't." "You've killed before." Her tone was no nonsense and firm. And God help me, she was right. I'd shot 3 perps in my career. One, a drug-crazed man who threatened to kill his infant daughter. Another, a man who rushed me with a knife on a dark road. And the last, a young man who had shot the man who had hit his wife's car head-on and then turned to shoot me in his grief-induced insanity. Those deaths were in the line of duty. The dead were strangers, and I had shot to defend myself. Killing my grandfather was something quite different. "I have, but it's different." Grandmammy rose, her aged bones creaking as she pulled herself upright. Her gnarled, worn fingers pushed the bullet into the palm of my hand and wrapped my reluctant fingers around it. "No, it's not. He will kill me, kill you, and kill your son before he's done. The bloodlust is on him now, Greg, and he won't stop. He may be an old man in life, but he's powerful strong as a werewolf. Grandpa would want you to kill him before he hurt any of us. You know that, and if you don't, well, we talked about it some years ago." "I can't." Even as I spoke, I realized that I could, that killing him would be as much an act of love as defense. I thought of my small son upstairs, his tender body that would crunch beneath the werewolf's fangs, and I steeled myself to do what must be done. Better to end Grandpa's long torture as a werewolf now than wait until one of us lay dead. Better to kill him before he might make my son another werewolf. "My revolver is in the car," I said, my words choking up through repressed tears. "I'll get it." Grandmammy nodded. "Best load it right off in case you need it." 1,000 stars sparkled overhead, paled by the strong light of the full moon. I reached into the truck and grasped my weapon, chambered the silver bullet, and turned at the sound of something large running. I cannot call that thing Grandpa, came out of the woods. A tall, strong beast, at least 7 feet tall. Thick, coarse, dark brown hair covered the body. The mouth snarled at me, growling, and I saw the teeth, terrible fangs stained with rich red blood. As it jumped at me, lunged toward me, I aimed my weapon and fired 1 shot. I did not miss. I'm a noted sharpshooter, and the shot found its mark. At the moment of impact, the creature screamed, a horrible, anguished sound that made my blood run cold. Tears slicked my cheeks, and I realized that I cried out too. My wordless cry of grief, of pain, of terror came when the yellow eyes altered, shifted, and became my grandfather's familiar brown eyes. I watched as the fur faded, leaving a naked old man's body gaunt and pitiful in the moonlight. He was dead, and the rest of the truth came to me then. I would answer for this in the bright light of day, for shooting my grandfather through the heart, and no one would ever believe what I knew was true. He was a werewolf. You're listening to the Blackwater Media Radio Network, the finest in digital audio entertainment. This is Blackwater Media coming to you from the great city of Atlanta. Listen to me, please, and be guided by these words. Listen well and heed the warnings that I bear witness to. For this horror is real. How Satan first came to intermix man and wolf and unleash the plague of lycanthropy upon the earth is lost in the mists of time. What is sure is that in doing so, he created a vile affliction that has contaminated many souls and caused much woe in the world. Any who suffer the ruinous misfortune of being bitten by a werewolf, and who does not die of their wounds before the first following full moon, will fall victim themselves to the curse. When first bitten, to all outward appearances, those who have become infected by lycanthropy are as normal men. However, when the moon is full, the contagion running through their veins takes hold, and they lose all control of their mind and body. An irresistible compulsion drives the lycanthrope to abandon his dwelling and in the dead of night find open ground. When the full moon light falls upon the creature, the transformation from man to beast takes hold. Once in lupine form, bloodlust overwhelms the lycanthrope, and it succumbs to the animal cravings for blood and violence that course through his being. The first few times that this change occurs, the slaughter of mere animals will suffice to sate his appetite. However, as time passes and the plague begins fully to infect his soul, such dull flesh as this will no longer satisfy his cravings, and the werewolf must seek out human victims. The more lunar cycles that pass before a lycanthrope is destroyed, the harder it becomes for them to maintain the semblance of human form. Eventually they succumb fully to the beast that lurks within and spend the rest of their days in wolf form, roaming the nights in an outrageous frenzy of bloodlust. Werewolves have the intelligence of man allied to the feral cunning and ferocity of a wolf. This makes them a dangerous foe to pursue. However, the flowers of the wolf's bane plant have a similar effect on them as the Holy Cross does upon vampires. To guard a dwelling against their entry, you should cover all entrances in an abundance of these pungent flowers. As you hunt their kind, a necklace of wolf's bane will afford you great protection. Know also that only weapons tipped with silver may harm a werewolf. Should you embark upon such a quest as this, remember my words, and may God go with you.
mugshot Stewart hasn't seen his high school teammates for 20 years. Looks like a stroll-light night.
Looks like a stroll-light night. Looks like a stroll-light night. When things are going right. Looks like a stroll-light night. Looks like a
Stroll-light, a great-tasting beer that doesn't fill you up.
Looks like a stroll-light night when good times come along.
This is the first time I'm actually sharing this experience with anyone, and it's taken me quite a while to be able to tell it, because ever since it happened, I haven't been the same. I don't sleep as well, have constant nightmares, have been generally getting more ill and just being traumatized. My brother as well, with whom it occurred. Last summer, in July, I was visiting my brother, who happens to live in northern Michigan in a town called Rapid City. The place itself is pretty close to the Traverse State Forest area in which a long road runs through it called Supply Road. This road has thick forests and brush on both sides with occasional farms. We'd gone down south to Fife Lake, which is only about a 30-minute drive from where he lived. He wanted to show me around the area and the lake itself and have some fun with photography. It was about 9 p.m. when we finally decided to call it a day, and it was pretty dark at this point. On the way back, we were both like, fuck it, let's drive through the Traverse State Forest area for a more scenic route, even though it's out of the way. We both love the woods and going through scenic routes, and I love getting to see new parts of Michigan. As we pulled onto Supply Road, it didn't seem more than 7 or so minutes before we had our experience with whatever the hell it was we saw. Going north on this road, on the left side, is about 10 or so feet of clearing with just dirt and grass before it hits thick brush and trees. It was a little after 9 p.m. at this point, and as we were driving, I'm in the passenger seat, I noticed this large, black-like dog on the side of the road. But something wasn't right. It looked like it was crouched down as a human being would, waiting to jump out or something. It wasn't looking over in our direction, but you could tell its head was absolutely canine-like. As we got closer and the lights actually started to shine on it, it immediately turned its head towards us and stood up as it made this horrible hissing-like sound. I don't know how else to describe it. Both my brother and I turned sheet white at this point and it slammed on our brakes. About 30 feet away from us on the side of the road standing was this, I don't even know what to call it. I want to say werewolf because that's the only thing that really described what it looked like. But then maybe it was a skinwalker. I don't know. This beast had piercing, sharp yellow eyes that for some reason didn't reflect at all when the light hit them. But they almost seemed to glow on their own, which was creepy in and of itself. The thing had a longer snout and very sharp pointed ears and was massively tall. When it hissed at us, you could see how sharp its massive teeth were and how fast it stood up and scared us both as we had startled this thing. The thing honestly looked like something out of a goddamn horror movie, and if CGI actually looked real. We had our windows rolled down all the way home and we smelled what I can only describe as a mix of garbage, decaying flesh, and wet dog together. We didn't really smell it until after it stood up and we had slammed on our brakes. This damn thing was about 8 or 9 feet tall, I would say, and had a humongous bill. Not bulky per se, but it was big and extremely lean. It looked like an extremely masculine and lean human male body, although I didn't see any genitalia. This thing was very shaggy and hairy, with finger-like claws, like pretty much you'd see in a typical werewolf movie. I didn't get a chance to stare at the feet or anything, as I was motionless staring at this thing. We only got to stare at it for what seemed like a few seconds before it let out this horrible scream that shook me and my brother to the core. It immediately started to pace towards our truck aggressively with its claws baring and teeth baring as if it were extremely aggressive and ready to kill me and my brother. We screamed at the top of our lungs and floored it as hard as we could. He literally sped all the way home and we didn't say a word the rest of the way. We didn't sleep at all that night, and I haven't been the same person ever since. What I saw that night truly terrified me so badly And I'm sharing this with people because I hope they can educate themselves and know what's out there, or that it will help someone speak up and share their experience and not worry about ridicule.
Hey everybody, this is Dr. William Lester, and I want to tell you about a new membership opportunity from Blackwater Media. Now yes, you can sign up for the regular Swamp Hunter Society membership at $4.99 a month and have access to the premium content. But you also have the option of getting the Blackwater Media VIP full year membership. That's right, with a one-time payment of just $49.99, you can have the same access to the same premium content, early releases, at a savings of almost $10 off of a regular membership. So if you enjoy the finest in paranormal and cryptid horror, head on over to blackwatermedia.net and get your Blackwater Media VIP full year membership.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
The areas in and around Columbus, Georgia have a rich history. And with this rich history, the city of Columbus is also home to a great number of ghost stories. The stories continue outside of the city limits in the surrounding communities. Those stories include one that is not a ghost story, but more of a legend that seems like something out of a late-night horror movie, and one of the most popular legends in the state of Georgia. And it has to do with a werewolf in neighboring Talbot County. Talbot County is a small community located to the east of Columbus. The county is home to a little more than 6,200 residents and a rather quiet place for the most part. One year, parts of the county were devastated when a powerful tornado tore through areas of the county, including the city of Talbotton. However, more than a century ago, a story came out of Talbot County that seems as though it was the inspiration for a nightmare. The Burt family was a very prominent and well-off family in Talbot County. The family had several children and lived in a home in the Pleasant Hill area located near Talbotton. The children included one daughter by the name of Emily Isabella Burt. Emily's father died at the age of 37, and her mother inherited the family's 300-acre estate. Shortly after the death of her father, Emily's mother sent her to boarding school in Paris. The legend says that while in Europe, Emily contracted lycanthropy, a supernatural transformation of a person into a wolf. Or to some, a mental disorder where a person has a delusion of being an animal, usually a wolf. After attending boarding school, Emily returned to Georgia. When she returned, her behavior was oddly different. People said that Emily was always sickly and distant. She often stared off into space and was known to sleepwalk. Shortly after her return to Talbot County, there was a rash of killing and slaughtering of wildlife, including sheep. Many of the residents believed that a wolf was to blame for those deaths. One night, local residents formed a posse and armed themselves to seek and hunt down the wolf responsible for the killings. According to the legend, an elderly man in the area who was a native of Eastern Europe told the members of the posse to melt down anything silver. They weren't dealing with a regular wolf. They were dealing with a werewolf. The posse, armed with their silver bullets, descended into the countryside, seeking the beast.
The story says that one of the members of the posse came across the wolf, and it was indeed a werewolf. The hunter shot the werewolf, wounding it, and the wolf fled into the woods and escaped the posse. Oddly, the legend says that the next day, Emily's mother found her suffering from a gunshot wound. A local doctor treated Emily's wound, and shortly after, her mother sent her back to Europe for treatment of lycanthropy by a specialist. The legend says once Emily was shipped off to Europe, the killings of livestock stopped in Talbot County. After an undisclosed amount of time in Europe, Emily is said to have returned to Georgia and was cured of the disorder she suffered from. She lived her life out and became a respected member of the community and inherited the family property, which included land in Talbot, Muskogee, and Meriwether counties. Emily died on June 18, 1911, and was buried at a cemetery in Woodland, Georgia. She was 69 years old when she died. So we're left with a mystery. Did a werewolf haunt the hills and woodland areas around Columbus, Georgia? We'll never know for sure. But what if it was true? What if?
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
Since the days that man's feet first trod upon the world, he has been natural enemies with the wolf. This primordial foe has since become the focal point of our terror, nightmares, and through these, legend. Chief among such legends is that a dark, malevolent force takes possession of the body of man and transforms it into a hideous fusion of that man and his ancient adversary. Swift, powerful, and filled with a relentless, murderous rage, this horrific fiend takes to the fields, rooftops, forests, and alleyways of the world to sate its preternatural bloodlust. This radio program is called Shadowland, and you will agree, I hope, that it is a most appropriate venue to present to you the werewolf. Mrs. Delbert Gregg of Texas told of her encounter with a shape-shifting creature in the 1960 issue of Fate magazine. Mrs. Gregg said that one night in 1958, when her husband was on a business trip, she moved her bed close to a screen window, hoping to catch some cool breeze from a thunderstorm brewing on the southwestern horizon. She heard a scratching sound from the window shortly after she fell asleep. In a flash of lightning, she saw a huge, shaggy, wolf-like creature clawing at the screen and staring at her with baleful, glowing, slitted eyes. She saw it bared white fangs. The creature fled from the yard into a clump of bushes as she leapt from her bed to grab a flashlight. Mrs. Gregg said, "I watched for the animal to come out of the bushes, but after a short time, instead of a great shaggy wolf running out, the figure of an extremely tall man suddenly parted the thick foliage and walked hurriedly down the road, disappearing into the darkness." Mark Shackleman was driving east of Highway 18 near Jefferson, Wisconsin, on an evening in 1936 when he saw a figure digging in an Indian mound. He saw a hair-covered creature that was over 6 feet tall with both ape-like and dog-like features, with pointed ears standing erect. Its hands had shriveled thumbs and forefingers, and also 3 fully formed fingers. Shackleman went back to the sighting the next evening, hoping to see the creature again, and he did. The creature was making neo-human sounds with 3-syllable growling. Years later, his son, who was a Kenosha newspaper editor, wrote that his father's first thought was that it must be something satanic. Between July and October 1972, a number of residents of Ohio allegedly saw a werewolf-like creature. Some people reported encountering a 6 to 8 foot tall creature that a witness described as human with an oversized wolf-like head and an elongated nose. Another said it had huge hairy feet, fangs, and it ran from side to side, like a caveman in the movies. 4 Gallup, New Mexico youths allegedly encountered a werewolf along the side of a road near Whitewater one day in January of 1970. One witness reported, "It was about 5 feet 7, and I was surprised it could go so fast. At first I thought my friends were playing a joke on me, but when I found out they weren't, I was scared. We rolled up the windows real fast and locked the doors of the car. I started driving faster, about 60, but it was hard because that highway had a lot of sharp turns. Someone finally got a gun out and shot it. I know it got hit and fell down, but there was no blood. I know it couldn't be a person because people cannot move that fast." Stay tuned for part 2 of the Shadowland Radio special, The Werewolf.
Welcome to part 2 of the Shadowland Radio Show special series, The Werewolf. The Skinwalker is the name for a werewolf-type creature known among the Navajos of the Southwest. In 1936, in Yale Publications in Anthropology, anthropologist William Morgan recounted an interview with a Navajo identified only as Hahago. Hahago said of the Skinwalker, "They go very fast. They can go to Albuquerque in an hour and a half, a 4-hour trip by automobile," according to Morgan. Many Navajos believe firmly in the existence of skinwalkers and refuse to discuss them publicly for fear of retribution. They believe skinwalkers walk freely among the tribe and secretly transform under the cover of night. The term Yi Narulshi literally translates to "with it, he goes on all fours." According to Navajo legend, a skinwalker is a medicine man or witch who has attained the highest level of priesthood in the tribe.
but chose to use his or her power for evil by taking the form of an animal to inflict pain and suffering on others. To become a skinwalker requires the most evil of deeds, the killing of a close family member. They literally become humans who have acquired immense supernatural power, including the ability to transform into animals and other people. According to the Navajo skinwalker legend, these evil witches are typically seen in the form of a coyote, owl, fox, crow, or, most horrifically, a wolf. Because it is believed that skinwalkers wear the skins of the animals they transform into, it is considered taboo to wear the pelt of any animal. In fact, the Navajo are only known to wear two hides, sheepskin and buckskin, both of which are used only for ceremonial purposes. Those who have talked of their encounters with these evil beings describe a number of ways in which the skinwalker will try to inflict harm. Some describe hearing knocks on the window or banging on the walls. Others have spotted an animal-like figure peering in through a window. According to Navajo skinwalker legend, they are seldom caught. Those who do track a skinwalker and learn of their true identity must pronounce the name of the evil one in full. Once this happens, the skinwalker will get sick or die for the wrongs they have inflicted against others. In the fall of 1973, Western Pennsylvania played host to dozens of reports of strange ape-like creatures, sometimes seen in association with UFOs. These creatures were said to be 7 to 8 feet tall and gave off strong, unpleasant odors. Another type of creature reported by investigators was said to be between 5 and 6 feet tall. It was described as looking just like an ordinary, extremely muscular man with a covering of thick, dark hair. Again, in these reports, the arms were very long and hung down past the knees. This creature appeared to have superior agility, exceeding that of a deer. From footprints discovered, the stride of the creatures varied between 52 and 57 inches. In these reports, there were no indication of odors. On October 31st, 1991, at 8:30 p.m., a woman drove on Bray Road past Delavan, Wisconsin, which is approximately 30 miles south-southeast of Jefferson, the location of the Shackleman encounter from 1936, discussed in Part 1. She felt her right front tire jump off the pavements as if it had hit something. The woman stopped the car and looked into the misty darkness and saw a dark, hairy creature with a bulked-out chest racing towards her. She went back into her car and tried to speed away when the creature leaped onto her trunk. The creature eventually fell off from the trunk because the trunk was too wet to have a firm grip. Later, the woman returned with a friend and they had a glimpse of a big form rising from the side of the road. Stay tuned for Part 3 of the Shadowland Radio Show special series, The Werewolf. In the fall of 1989, Lorianne Andrizzi had a horrifying encounter with a werewolf-type creature as she drove along Bray Road in Wisconsin. She saw a person, or what she thought was a person, kneeling in a haunched position at the edge of the road. She slowed down, and to her surprise, the figure stood and stared at her at no more than 6 feet away from the passenger side of her car. The figure was covered in grayish-brown hair and had big fangs and pointed ears. His face was long and had a snout like a wolf, she told a reporter. The figure's eyes glowed in the darkness and were of a yellowish gold color. The arms were jointed strangely. The creature was holding its hands with its palms upward. The arms were muscular like a man who had worked out. The back legs looked like they were behind him, like a person kneeling. The sighting lasted about 45 seconds, and she had no idea what the creature could have been until she saw an illustration of a werewolf at her local public library. Around that same time, in the city of Elkhorn, a dairy farmer named Scott saw a strange-looking dog along his pasture. It was bigger and taller than a German shepherd. It had pointed ears and a hairy tail with long, scraggly, grayish-black hair. He said it was built heavy in front with a real strong chest. In the soft soil nearby, he found enormous footprints, which were 4 to 5 inches in diameter. In 1972, in the Robson family home in Hexham, England, only 10 minutes walk away from where the legendary Wolf of Allendale had roamed the woods, 2 young brothers dug up 2 small carved stone heads while they were tending the garden. Several nights after the discovery of the stone heads, neighbor Ellen Dodd and her daughter were sitting up late one evening when both of them witnessed a half-man, half-beast entering the bedroom. The pair screamed in terror, but the creature seemed indifferent to them and simply left the room. It was heard to be padding down the stairs as if on its hind legs. Later on, the front door was found open. It has been thought that the creature had been in search of something and had left the house to continue searching elsewhere. Interest in the local legend of the Wolf of Allendale was rekindled by this event, and the stone heads became associated with the possible reappearance of the Wolfman. The 2 stone heads, each about the size of an orange, were thought to be Celtic in origin, and collector Dr. Ann Ross took possession of the heads, as she had several other stone heads in her collection and wished to compare them to the Hexham pair. A few nights after taking possession of the heads, Dr. Ross awoke at 2 in the morning feeling cold and frightened. Looking up, she saw a strange creature standing in her bedroom doorway. It was about 6 feet high, slightly stooping, and it was black against the white door. And it was half wolf and half man. The upper part, I would have said, was a wolf, and the lower part was human. And I would have again said that it was covered with a kind of black, very dark fur. It went out, and I just saw it clearly, and then it disappeared. And something made me run after it. A thing I wouldn't normally have done, but I felt compelled to run after it. I got out of bed and I ran, and I could hear it going down the stairs. Then it disappeared towards the back of the house. Living and working in Southampton, Dr. Ross knew nothing of the Wolf of Allendale legend and the association of the Hexham heads with the possible return of the wolf, and she attributed the experience to a nightmare. Dr. Ross came home with her archaeologist husband Richard Feacham one day, only to find their teenage daughter Bernice in a distressed state. Bernice explained that she had used her key to unlock the front door and entered the house that afternoon to witness a large black shape rushing down the stairs. Halfway down the stairs, the creature vaulted the banister, landing with a soft, heavy thud like a large animal with padded feet. Believing the presence of the stone heads to be responsible for these events, Dr. Ross passed on her whole collection of stone heads, along with the Hexham pair, to other collectors. The Hexham heads found their way to the British Museum for public display, though were soon removed from display and mothballed amid reports of unsettling events associated with the heads. There have been claims that the Hexham heads were not Celtic in origin at all, and had simply been carved as toys by the previous occupants of the Robson family home only 20 years previously, and had subsequently become lost in the garden. It has also been said that the heads were examined by universities of Newcastle and Southampton for dating. For now, the current whereabouts of the Hexham heads remains unknown. Despite this, the legend of the Hexham heads and its association with the Wolf of Allendale has become a cornerstone of the local folklore of that area. I'm Dr. William Lester. This is the Shadowland Radio Show, and I want to thank you for listening to this special series, The Werewolf.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Well, by now we're getting a bit used to winter. We're like soldiers in the middle of a campaign, growing hardened to discomfort and better able to take it, and looking with longing toward the day when the war is won and there'll be plenty of everything again, including that good Olga coal. But like good soldiers, we can't afford to let down now that victory is in sight. We must work harder than ever to get every bit of heat from the coal we get, make it go further and use less. We must figuratively tighten the belts on our coal bins and wade into old man winter with a little less fuel and a little more heat from every ton. That can help make Hitler's ghost walk.
Do you believe that monsters are real? Do you understand that there's more to the world than what you might see on the History Channel or Animal Planet? Well, for me, the answer to all of the above is a resounding hell yes. And here's why. One night, just over a year ago, I was driving to the grocery store. But before I could get out of my neighborhood, I had to go around this roundabout. All of a sudden, I had to hit my brakes because a tall figure was crossing my path. It was walking right in front of my car, and then stopped and looked straight at me. I got a pretty good look at it, and to say that I was instantly scared shitless would be an understatement. This thing was covered with what looked like brown hair. Its face had a little less hair, and it had what I would call a short snout and a mouthful of sharp yellow teeth. And the eyes, god damn, those eyes were pure hot red. But yet, none of that shook me more than realizing that this creature was wearing a pair of ragged blue jeans. And I thought to myself, what the fuck? Then one word popped into my head. Werewolf. Then it started walking like a normal person. But then all of a sudden, it got down on four legs and took off running across the road. My eyes followed. About 20 yards away, it stopped right under a lone light pole, which afforded me another good look. It stood up again, looked in my direction, then turned and ran off into the darkness, this time on two legs. I whipped my car around the roundabout and drove back to my house. I looked at the dashboard clock. It was 10:30. I jumped out of the car, made it to the front door, and ran all the way upstairs to my brother. I told him what happened, and it's crazy, but he believed me. Next day, we went out to where I'd seen it, but we found no traces. I never saw the creature after that night, but for the next 2 nights, there were blood-chilling howls off in the distance. I realized later that on the night of my encounter and the subsequent 2 nights, that the moon was full. And that, my friends, is why I know that monsters exist.
Sometimes in a person's life, there's an experience that is so frightening and traumatic that their entire concept of reality is changed, and so too is their view of their place in the larger order of things. In the mid-60s, my uncle was a deputy sheriff in a small town. Now, I don't want to reveal the location because of all of the self-styled investigators, thrill seekers, and so-called adventurers out there just waiting to pounce. Anyway, he'd locked up a drifter who he'd caught in the process of trying to steal a car. The stranger had been ranting about having to get out of town before nightfall. He was sure that the guy was most likely stoned out of his mind. That night, my uncle was driving back to the station just off his rounds. He noted what a crystal clear night it was, with the stars and an almost orange full moon lighting up the sky. He was only a block from the station when something impossible ran out in front of him. Some kind of creature. It had to be, but he recognized the blue shirt of the drifter. It was torn in 3 places. But the thing, hair covered its face. Its ears were long and pointed, and it flashed a mouth with insanely jagged, pointed teeth. It stood there in the middle of the road, snarling, not like an animal, but like a madman, and illuminated by the police car headlights. My uncle jumped out of the car and got off 2 shots at it before it dashed off into the darkness. He was sure that he'd hit it, but it seemed unfazed aside from being jerked by the impact. He found the office in shambles and the cell door bars were bent wide open. He didn't know it at the time, but my uncle had an encounter with a werewolf and lived to tell the tale. The timber wolves around Harper's Creek had gotten out of hand. There were so many wolves, the farmers couldn't stop them from killing their cattle and sheep. So the state put a bounty on them. It would pay a hunter $10 for every wolf pelt he turned in. A butcher in town named Tom Wilson thought that that was pretty good money, so he stopped working as a butcher and began killing wolves. He was quite a shot too. I mean, he was really good at it. Every year he killed over 500 of them. That came to more than $5,000, which was quite a bit of money in those days. After 4 or 5 years, Tom had killed so many wolves there were hardly any left in that area. So he retired and he vowed never to harm another wolf because wolves had made him rich. Then one day a farmer reported that a large black wolf had killed 2 of his sheep. He shot at it and even hit it, but the bullets didn't have any effect. Soon that wolf was seen all over the countryside, killing and running, sometimes, to the witness's horror, on 2 legs. That's when the talk of werewolves began, and this creature couldn't be stopped. One night, the creature even came onto Tom's property and killed one of his cows. You better believe that when that happened, Tom forgot about his decision to never harm another wolf. He went into town the next morning and bought a young lamb for bait. He took it into the hills and tied it to a tree. Then he backed off about 50 yards and sat down under another tree. With his gun in his lap, he waited. When Tom didn't come back, his friends started to look for him. And finally they found the lamb. It was still tied to a tree, hungry, but still alive. Then they found Tom. He was still sitting against the other tree, but he was dead. His throat had been torn open. But there was no sign of a struggle. His gun hadn't even been fired, and there were no tracks in the soil around him. As for the werewolf, it was never seen again in that region. But of course, this all happened more than 100 years ago. So my advice to you is to take special care on nights of the full moon.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
Converse, Texas is not the kind of place one would normally associate with a monster sighting. The town, while small, it encompasses only 6.3 square miles, is now densely populated and heavily developed. Sitting only 15 miles to the northeast of downtown San Antonio, it has become hard to discern where Converse ends and the Alamo City begins. It's known for many things these days: great Mexican food, the Judson High School Rockets football team, and Randolph Air Force Base, to name a few. Converse, however, was not always so developed and civilized. Like most of Bexar County, it was once not much more than arid plains, rocks, cactus, and chaparral scrubland. Such lonesome country often holds secrets. The area that was to become Converse is no exception. It's said that back in the mid to late 1800s, a rancher moved on to a plot of land near what is now Converse. The man was a rugged sort who had grown up in true pioneer fashion. Some versions of the tale suggest he was a military combat veteran who moved to the area in an effort to put the horrors of the Civil War behind him and live out his days quietly on the South Texas plains. This man had a son who was something of a disappointment to him. The boy was frail, bookish, and preferred studying to wrangling and hunting. This frustrated the old rancher to no end, and he decided to, quote, make a man out of the boy. To this end, the rancher decided to send his son out hunting. He hoped that the boy would take a liking to the sport and, after making his first kill, would prefer the more manly activity of hunting to that of reading and studying all day. The old man put a long gun in the boy's hands and instructed him to go out and shoot a deer. The family needed meat after all. He directed the boy to hunt a heavily wooded area along a creek called Skull Crossing. The boy was reluctant at first and resisted. One way or the other, he was finally coerced into going. The old rancher watched with high hopes as his son walked away from the homestead toward the woods. The old man would soon be disappointed, however, as his son returned a few hours later empty-handed. When chastised for returning without any game, the boy told his father that he left the area out of fear, as he had spotted and been stalked by a monster resembling a werewolf. The father immediately dismissed this wild story and cajoled his son into returning to the area to finish the hunt. The boy did not want to go, but his father left him no choice. Trembling and fearful, the boy trudged back out to the ominously named area of Skull Crossing. Little did the old rancher know it would be the last time he would see his son alive. Hours passed, and darkness began to fall. The old man, the story goes, began to worry and have second thoughts about sending his inexperienced son out into the woods alone. While he hoped the reason the boy had not returned was because he had yet to make a kill, he began to have a sinking feeling deep in his gut that something was wrong. Deciding not to wait any longer, the rancher rounded up some neighbors and they made their way toward the wooded area near Skull Crossing in search of the boy. What they found upon arriving there is the stuff of nightmares. The search party happened upon a monstrous, hairy creature hunched over the body of the rancher's son. The beast was in the act of ravenously devouring the boy when discovered. The men got off a few shots at the monster, but it bounded away at lightning speed. The werewolf, as it was dubbed, was described as standing between 8 and 9 feet tall, covered in dark hair or fur. Members of the search party described it as being some kind of unholy combination between a wolf and a man. The old rancher was understandably devastated by the death of his boy. He blamed himself for not believing his son's story and believed he sent him out to his doom by forcing him to return to Skull Crossing to complete his hunt. The versions of the tale I've generally heard say that the rancher died shortly thereafter. Some versions say he had become reclusive, refused to eat, and wasted away. Others say that he committed suicide by setting fire to his own home and burning up. Either way, it was a sad end all the way around. Did this event actually occur? You won't find any old newspaper accounts documenting the incident. I've looked and came up empty. Somehow, though, the tale has lived on for more than a century. Should the story be dismissed as an old campfire story? A myth? I'm not so sure. There are similar stories involving werewolves and other hairy-covered monsters that live on in the folklore of the region. The story of the Wild Woman of the Navidad, Bear King of Marble Falls, the legend behind Woman Hollering Creek, the Hairy Man of Round Rock, and the mysterious limestone carving dubbed the Cleo Face, all allude to old tales of beasts of similar appearance. Of course, much folklore has a basis in truth. It's possible that the legend of the converse werewolf has its genesis in an actual event. Some believe that if a young boy was killed near Skull Crossing, it was likely the result of an attack by an animal, much more mundane than a werewolf. That's fair enough, but it fails to take into account the description given by the men who spied the beast. The animal was described as bipedal, covered in hair, 8 to 9 feet tall, and lightning fast. Whatever the animal was, it was not a mundane member of the local fauna. In fact, the description attributed to the animal, if given today, would immediately bring to mind images of what is now known as Dogman, or even the Sasquatch. Many Bigfoot enthusiasts seek to dismiss the idea that the converse werewolf might have been a wood ape. No doubt this is because of the alleged death of a human being at the hands of the said beast. Others are not so quick to dismiss the possibility that a Sasquatch is the villain behind the legend. Most who entertain the idea that the North American wood apes might exist speculate that their diet is likely similar to that of black bears. Black bears do subsist mainly on plant matter, berries, roots, and nuts, to name just a few. Black bears also indulge in eating insects, grubs, birds, and mammals when the opportunity presents itself. While rare, black bears do occasionally hunt humans for the express purpose of devouring them. If wood apes exist, and if their diet is indeed similar to that of black bears, then it would not be out of the realm of possibility that a hungry Sasquatch might take advantage of a situation where there was an easy meal to be had. Admittedly, this is contrary to the behavior most often reported by witnesses who claim to have seen Bigfoot. Most witnesses report that these creatures, once they realize they've been spotted, simply retreat back into the forest and make themselves scarce. It must be acknowledged, though, that tales of cannibalism and abductions have been associated with these creatures since time immemorial. Many Native Americans feared Sasquatches and believed they would snatch a wayward member of the tribe when given the opportunity. One simply cannot, in my view, use ancient Native American tales as supporting evidence that the Sasquatch is real, while ignoring the other details of the legend. People continue to disappear in the wild places of North America to this day, some under very odd circumstances. Many are never found. Most, no doubt, simply get lost and die of exposure, dehydration, etc. Others are likely the victims of foul play, of the very human variety. Could a small minority of the missing be victims of abduction at the hands of Sasquatch? The legendary accounts of Albert Osman, Mushalat Harry, along with the First Nations legends, suggests it's at least a possibility. The story of the converse werewolf is slowly fading away now. Sophisticated suburbanites have little time for such tales. As the years pass, fewer and fewer South Texans hear of the legend. Even those who have heard the story tend to dismiss it as folklore. It is a scary story to be told around a campfire or at Halloween, and nothing more. To those of us who pursue these creatures and venture into the deepest forests and remote places in North America, the story has a different meaning. It's a cautionary tale. Fact or fiction, it reminds us to take nothing for granted, to always be careful and aware of our surroundings. You might well suppose that we'll never really know what, if anything, happened at Skull Crossing all those years ago. And I'd be inclined to agree with you. Did a young boy really die? Did a grief-stricken and guilt-ridden father join his son in death soon thereafter? The truth, I'm afraid, has been buried along with the early residents of Bexar County. Maybe it's best it remains there. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland Radio Show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.